Into week 15 of the fantasy football season, here's a few quarterbacks I look to get on the waiver wire this week. The first guy, Jimmy Garoppolo of the San Francisco 49ers. I know Garoppolo has been on and off this season here, but in week 14 he had a great game at the Cincinnati Bengals. 296 pass yards, 2 touchdowns and 3 rushing yards. In week 15 here in the first round of most fantasy owners' playoffs, he's got a great matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons that give up the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. We know the Falcons really can't stop anybody. We know teams have gone up and down the field versus them this season, even though I know in week 14 Cam Newton got pulled in that ball game a few times because he just couldn't get the job done. But besides that, teams have been successful. This San Francisco 49er team's definitely in the hunt right now. And Jimmy G's been playing pretty solid football the last few games for him. Week 12 versus Minnesota, 230 pass yards, a touchdown, and then though. Week 13 in Seattle, 299 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 windows. And like I mentioned, week 14 in Cincinnati, 296, 2 TDs, and 3 rushing yards. So right here, week 15 versus Atlanta, it's a home game for the 49ers. And I think he has a good ball game as Jimmy G. And right now, he's available in 70% of fantasy leagues. The next quarterback's Tua Tagovailoa of the Miami Dolphins. So another guy up and down this season, on your team and off your team each and every week. It seems like 1 week he's an ad, the next week is a drop, but he's got a very juicy schedule coming up here for the playoffs. Week 15 versus the Jets, they give up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Week 16 at the Saints, they give up the 10th most points to quarterbacks. And week 17, if you make the championship, they give up the 3rd most fantasy points is Tennessee. So right here, he had the bye week in week 14. And this Miami team, believe it or not, right now, they've been one of the better teams in all of pro football after the last few weeks here, winning 5 in a row. So the last few games here for Tua, week 11 at the Jets, 273 passing, 2 touchdowns in it though. Week 12 versus Carolina, not a great game, 230 pass yards, a touchdown. And week 13 versus the Giants, 244 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. So right here, great matchup in week 15. He's available right 8% of fantasy leagues. And he's definitely an ad here, especially if you're a Lamar Jackson owner or something. I think Tua could fill in and have pretty decent ball games in the next few weeks. The next quarterback's Taysom Hill of the New Orleans Saints. Taysom Hill, he's a better fantasy quarterback than a real-life quarterback, obviously. So Taysom Hill available in 50% of fantasy leagues. And so far in the first 2 starts for him this year, week 13 versus Dallas, 264 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 intos, 101 yards rushing. And then week 14 at the Jets, a pedestrian game for the most part, but he had a late garbage time 45-yard touchdown run. Was Hill, 175 pass yards, 73 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. So right here, he's got a ball game at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday Night Football. And I know that game he's going to have to run a lot. He's going to have to throw the football all over the yard. And let's be honest, he gets an easy 7 to 10 bonus points just running the football. So right here is a hybrid quarterback who's going to run a lot, who's going to get a goal line stamp as himself here, is Taysom Hill, who's available in 50% of fantasy leagues. At Tampa Bay, they're going to try to pull out all the stops, obviously, is New Orleans. And obviously, it's going to start with Taysom Hill, so I think it's a decent matchup for him. The Bucs do give up the 16th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And I think Hill could have a decent game, and he's available in 50% of fantasy leagues. And the next quarterback I look to get on the wire this week, Huntley of the Baltimore Ravens. So Lamar Jackson, he left the ball game in week 14 versus the Cleveland Browns with the ankle injury, and he got carted off. We don't know how serious it is, but more reports will come out in the next day or 2 here, I would assume. So Huntley in 2 starts this season. Week 11 at Chicago, 219 pass yards and into 40 yards rushing. And then week 14, he filled in mid-second quarter for Jackson at Cleveland. 270 pass yards, a touchdown, 45 rush yards, and 2 fumble losses. So another guy who's going to give you an extra 4-6 points running the football here, Huntley. We know he don't have the greatest of arms, but he hung in there at Cleveland. He gave his team a chance to tie the ball game and go to overtime, but they just couldn't get that 2-point conversion. I know week 15 is a tough matchup versus the Green Bay Packers, but if you're in a deep league or a 2-quarterback league and a Lamar Jackson owner, Huntley is a must-add for you if you're the Jackson owner, no doubt about it, because this guy's going to fill in, obviously. They still got a decent amount of weapons over there in Baltimore, and he played pretty decent in my opinion. Obviously, he had a costly fumble towards the end of the ball game, but he still hung in there and gave his team a chance to tie the game and go to overtime. So he's definitely worth an ad this week here on the wire. And the fifth and final quarterback I'd look to pick up is Mac Jones of the New England Patriots. So Mac Jones here had the bye week, and this New England Patriot team, the best team in the AFC record-wise right now. Mac Jones, we know he's more of a guy who's a game caller and game manager, but the weeks went on for this rookie here. He's been playing a little bit better, is Mac Jones. I know that week 13 game in Buffalo was a mess, but the winds were 50 miles per hour, and they were just smart with it, ran the football, and played defense to beat Buffalo. So I'll throw that game out the window. The last 3 games before that, week 10 versus Cleveland, 198 pass yards, 3 touchdowns. Week 11 in Atlanta, 207 pass yards, a touchdown in Into. And week 12 versus Tennessee, 310 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 11 rushing yards. So week 15, a Saturday night ball game for Mac Jones and the Patriots at the Indianapolis Colts. That we know the Colts give up a lot of points. This game could definitely be a decently high-scored game. And I think Mac Jones at Indianapolis could put up 20 fantasy points. So right now, he's available in 67% of fantasy leagues. And he's a quarterback I would look to get on the wire this week. So that's a few quarterbacks I would look to add on the waiver wire for week 15 of the fantasy football season.